Okay, let's get into this. We're all drowning in information these days, aren't we? Especially when it's about vital stuff like healthcare systems.
Absolutely. And finding clear, useful knowledge in all that noise.
hmm
It's tough.
It really is. But that's what we try to do here. Cut through it.
And today, yeah, we have a set of sources that tell a really striking story, quite eye-opening, frankly, about one doctor's journey inside the system.
Right. We're doing a deep dive into the experience of this doctor who, based on the material we've reviewed, saw some serious problems in healthcare, spoke out about them.
And then faced, well, a whole series of consequences he probably didn't expect.
Exactly. Unexpected consequences that, the sources say, led him to create something new, a tool, really, aimed at empowering patients directly.
Yeah, the doctor is Dr. Kadiali Srivatsa. He's got decades of experience. And it's interesting, one source mentioned ChatGPT apparently called him the 21st century Charaka,
Chirek, remind us.
an ancient Indian physician, hugely important figure in Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine.
hmm
So it frames Dr. Srivatsa's work, his contribution in this, long historical line.
That's quite a comparison. Okay, so our mission today, using only these sources, understand the specific worries Dr. Srivatsa raised, what they were.
Then look at how institutions allegedly responded. We're talking NHS, the GMC, the General Medical Council, even the Secretary of State gets mentioned.
Yeah, the pushback he apparently faced.
The personal cost, the professional toll described in the sources, and then how all that, this whole ordeal,
Yeah.
led to him creating this app, Dr. Maya GPT.
So let's start where the sources suggest it began for him. A real ethical discomfort.
Okay.
The material talks about him working in a specific type of NHS practice, a PMS practice, which in this case was managed by nurses.
Right.
And his feeling, according to the sources, was that patient care there was seriously compromised. Not just a little off, but seriously.
So more than just feeling uncomfortable, he believed he was seeing actual wrongdoings, unethical medical practice. Yes, that's what the sources state. He had specific concerns about how diagnoses were being made and treatments started,
By whom?
primarily by the nursing team, is the claim in the material. And these decisions, apparently, were often based on algorithms or protocols.
Instead of a doctor's direct clinical judgment.
That seems to be the implication. And the sources claim this led to errors, patients being ill for longer, delays in getting the right diagnosis, and sometimes actual complications.
That sounds really worrying. Did the sources give specific examples?
They did, yeah. Several are detailed. For instance, general concerns about how patients were managed in that practice, many from ethnic minority backgrounds.
Okay.
And then specifics like the time he prescribed budesonide, a steroid nasal spray for a child's congestion. And a nurse, according to the sources, wrongly challenged his clinical reasoning for using it.
Okay, so questioning his judgment inappropriately.
That's the picture painted. And then there's the case mentioned of Mrs. KH.
Ah, yes. Tell us about that one.
The sources describe her case as one where she allegedly suffered quite badly because, the claim is, a nurse lacked clinical knowledge and misinterpreted her blood test results.
And this could have been serious.
Very serious. The material suggests the situation was heading towards something called DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation, which is a life-threatening condition.
Wow. Okay. What other examples were there?
Another really disturbing one in the sources involves a child. The claim is this child suffered brain damage.
Oh, no. How?
Reportedly, it happened after nurses stopped a treatment. Dr. Srivatsa had recommended an inhaler for nasal congestion.
Why did they stop it?
Because the BNF, that's the British National Formulary, the standard prescribing guide, apparently didn't recommend that specific inhaler for babies under 1 year old. So protocol overrode the doctor's specific suggestion is the implication.
A protocol overriding clinical judgment with severe consequences, allegedly.
That's the claim. The sources also mention lots of other cases, things like rashes, other common problems being misdiagnosed and wrongly treated by nurses who were, in his view, just following these set algorithms or protocols.
So it wasn't just about diagnosis, but also about nurses prescribing.
Exactly. That was a major concern highlighted in the sources nurses prescribing medication without, he felt, enough pharmacological knowledge potentially working beyond their scope.
Right.
And here's a really crucial bit from the sources. When he tried to raise these concerns internally within the practice,
Which you'd think is the right thing to do.
you would. But the material claims that this sensitive information, his protected disclosure essentially, somehow got passed straight to the nurses he was concerned about.
Oh, okay. That sounds like a recipe for disaster, raising safety concerns, and the info goes right back to the people involved.
And the sources say that's exactly what unfolded. Backlash. Severe repercussions.
Like what?
He was apparently subjected to long, drawn-out investigations. The sources use the word humiliating.
Investigations about him.
Yes, about him. And the sources claim these were organized by nurses and based on complaints and claims that the material describes as unsubstantiated, starting way back in 2007.
So this wasn't just an internal practice issue anymore. It blew up, and the GMC got pulled in.
That's right, the General Medical Council. And according to the sources, their involvement is, well, it's quite something.
How so?
The material alleges the GMC initially just ignored his concerns about patient safety. Completely ignored them.
Ignored a doctor raising safety flags.
That's the claim. And allegedly denied knowing about them later, and instead they imposed what's called an interim orders canon, an IOP, on him.
Restrictions on his practice.
Yes. Temporary restrictions or conditions.
Yeah.
For 18 months.
For raising concerns. That seems backwards based on these sources.
It does seem counterintuitive. And what's really key here, the sources claim, is why. The GMC allegedly told him they don't act on complaints from individual doctors. Yeah. They act based on the opinion of the local primary care trust, the PCT. Even though the sources allege the GMC knew he felt he was being, quote, tortured by that same PCT and was facing these nurse-led investigations.
So they knew his situation was difficult, but said their hands were tied regarding his complaint. They'd only listen to the PCT, who he felt was part of the problem.
That's the scenario presented in the material, a real catch-22.
So what happened with that IOP? Did they find anything against him?
Eventually, no. The sources state the GMC lifted the IOP in February 2013.
Okay.
They specifically said there was no evidence his practice or behavior was a threat to patients. His registration, they said, should remain unblemished.
Right, so complete vindication then. Problem solved.
You'd think so.
No?
But no. This is, according to the sources, where a massive institutional error happened.
What was that?
The GMC, despite clearing him, failed to remove the notice about the IOP having been imposed from their public website.
They left the restriction notice up even after clearing him.
Yes. And the sources state this single failure, this mistake, directly stopped him from getting work as a doctor in the UK again. Employers would see the notice, even though it was out of date and lifted, and wouldn't hire him.
Oh my goodness. Cleared but professionally ruined by an administrative error? The personal impact must have been
devastating. The sources paint a really bleak picture. The GMC apparently admitted later it was a mistake not removing the notice.
They admitted it.
Yes, but also stated the damage cost was far beyond repair. Just heartbreaking.
What did that damage look like for him personally?
The sources talk about immense stress, years of unemployment, living alone in just a room in Germany at one point, with no money, no social support, his family life destroyed, and suffering from post-traumatic stress. He ended up going back to India just to try and cope and recover.
And even then, the issues with the system didn't stop.
No, the sources mention ongoing problems, like the GMC allegedly threatening later to take away his license entirely because he hadn't done his appraisal.
But how could he do an appraisal if he couldn't work?
Exactly. He couldn't work because they hadn't removed the notice. It's described as this impossible bureaucratic loop in the sources.
It's just incredible. The sources mentioned other bodies possibly involved too.
Briefly, yes. The material lists others that allegedly helped or supported what it calls the unethical medical practice. Royal colleges, the Nursing Medical Council, the BMA, the local medical council.
But no detail on how they were involved.
Not much detail in the summary we have, no. But they're named as part of the overall institutional picture he was up against. And it's important to stress, this wasn't a short fight. The sources say this battle was ongoing since way back in 2004.
Wow, nearly 2 decades. And day to day, the sources suggest it put him in impossible positions.
Yeah, absolutely. It describes him feeling like he sometimes had to hide the truth from patients about mistakes made by others.
Why?
Just to try and make his own working life bearable, less hostile. An awful ethical bind to be in.
And the fight against the NHS itself, the sources use strong language there.
They really do.
Yeah.
Comparing it to needing to go to the high court, highlighting huge financial losses, the deep humiliation for him and his family. The sources portray the NHS and the PCT as actively trying to, quote, tame him.
Yeah.
To subdue him.
How?
Well, one specific claim is they illegally removed him from the NHS performers list back in 2010. That's the list you need to be on to work.
And why illegally remove him?
The sources allege it was done deliberately to send a message. And again, the claim is other institutional bodies backed the NHS in these actions.
Facing all of that, the institutional weight, the financial ruin, the personal toll, did he consider giving up?
Well, the sources make a point of saying he didn't. Despite everything, despite the trauma, they emphasize his determination. He stuck to his principles. The materials even suggest that, in a way, surviving this ordeal helped him confront his fears, maybe strengthened him for future challenges.
Right.
And it mentions he took the Secretary of State to court and won.
He won against the Secretary of State.
That's what the source states. But winning came at a cost, too. The legal fight apparently bankrupted him. It just shows the sheer scale of what he was up against.
An incredibly tough personal story. Okay, so the sources then shift gears a bit, connecting his specific concerns to a much bigger picture, right?
Yes, exactly. They set his experiences, particularly his worries about wrong diagnoses and treatments, against the backdrop of a massive global health crisis, antimicrobial resistance, AMR.
AMR. We hear a lot about superbugs. Remind us what AMR is based on the sources.
Simply put, it's when germs, bacteria, fungi evolve so they can defeat the drugs designed to kill them.
Right.
Antibiotics stop working.
And the sources stress how serious this is.
Hugely serious. One source literally calls superbugs a holocaust, a threat to our existence. There are projections mentioned of 10 million deaths a year globally by 2050 if we don't get a grip on it.
10 million a year. How does this resistance spread so easily?
Lots of ways, according to the sources. International travel, obviously. People carry resistant bugs across borders. The germs themselves can actually share resistance genes, like swapping survival notes.
Wow.
It's in the food chain, too. Antibiotic use in farming is a big factor mentioned. And the environment, think untreated sewage, getting into water or soil, breeding resistant bugs.
And what's driving it? What makes the resistance develop in the first place?
The biggest drivers highlighted in the sources are the overuse and misuse of antibiotics in humans and in agriculture.
Just using them too much or in the wrong way?
Both. The sources point to a big global rise in antibiotic consumption, especially worrying in lower and middle-income countries where use of last resort antibiotics is soaring.
And how does this connect back to the healthcare system issues Dr. Srivatsa was worried about?
Directly. The sources list systemic problems that fuel AMR, things like primary care, maybe diagnosing minor things as infections needing treatment, leading to unnecessary hospital stays. Overprescribing antibiotics is a big one. Sometimes the sources suggest just to keep patients happy, or even, bizarrely, for nurses to try and prove they're as good as doctors.
That's quite a claim.
It is. Also, delays in getting the right diagnosis, doctors giving antibiotics for viruses where they don't work, patients demanding emergency care for minor things, healthcare staff potentially spreading bugs in hospitals. It all adds up.
So the very things Dr. Srivatsa was raising alarms about, wrong diagnosis, wrong treatment, unnecessary drugs, these are directly contributing to this huge global superbug threat.
Exactly. His personal battle, as described, taps right into these systemic issues that are helping drive AMR.
Which leads us to what he did next after all this. The sources say he created Dr. Maya GPT.
Yes. It's presented as his answer, his response, built from everything he went through and saw, including that connection to AMR. It actually evolved from an earlier tool he made.
Oh, really?
Yeah, called PCHI, the Pediatric Assessment Tool. That was designed to help junior doctors tell the difference between minor infections and more serious ones in kids. Dr. Maya GPT is the next evolution.
And its goal is patient empowerment.
That's absolutely central, according to the sources. It's described as an advanced app, and critically, it's free, designed to get information and guidance straight to patients.
What kind of information does it provide, based on the sources?
Guidance on symptoms, advice on preventing illness, personalized health tips. It's also meant to be a key resource for identifying possible infections, knowing how to stop them spreading.
Okay.
And even helping protect frontline workers and their families by, maybe reducing unnecessary trips to the clinic.
And accessibility is key here too, isn't it?
Hugely important. The sources highlight its design, a simple color-coded system.
Why color-coded?
Specifically to help people who can't read or write. The example given is women working in markets or farms in developing countries, so they can understand their symptoms using colors and get help early, without being scared or confused.
That's really thoughtful design, and his own motivation for it.
The sources quote him describing it movingly, not just as technology, but as a gift to people who are suffering and often ignored.
Powerful. And it sounds like the vision is bigger than just one app.
Definitely. The sources talk about a wider goal, trying to shift healthcare globally away from being, as they put it, fear-based and institution-controlled,
Towards what?
towards patient-centered care, where compassion matters more than, say, cash flow, equipping people with reliable, evidence-based information they can actually use.
And by giving people that information, presumably it helps with those system pressures we talked about, like antibiotic overuse.
That's the idea. If you, the patient, can understand common illnesses better, know when you really do need a doctor versus when you don't,
Right.
then maybe you have fewer unnecessary consultations. That eases the strain on the system and potentially cuts down on inappropriate antibiotic prescribing, helping fight AMR. The slogan mentioned sums it up. Your voice, your health, your power.
So when we pull all these threads together from the sources, what's the real takeaway for you listening right now? Well, I think it really shows how these big systemic problems in healthcare, the kind Dr. Srivatsa reportedly ran into, can have incredibly deep personal impacts on doctors trying to do the right thing and potentially on patients not getting the best care.
Yeah, it really brings it down to the individual level. It also highlights just how vital it is to think critically, to feel you can ask questions about your own healthcare.
Absolutely. And to have access to information you can trust and understand, especially when we're facing these huge complex threats like superbugs, like AMR.
Definitely. And Dr. Srivatsa's story, as told in these sources, despite being incredibly difficult for him, it does end with this potential positive, the creation of something like Dr. Maya GPT.
Right. It's presented as a tool that could empower you, the listener, to understand your health better, make more informed choices, maybe offering an alternative way to navigate a system that can feel complex and sometimes, frankly, quite broken.
So just to recap the journey described in the sources, Dr. Srivatsa raises serious concerns about patient care and ethics in the NHS, faces, allegedly, huge institutional pushback from the GMC, the NHS, suffers devastating personal consequences, wins a high court case against the Secretary of State, but is bankrupted by it.
And then channels all that difficult, traumatic experience into creating Dr. Maya GPT.
His work, as framed by the sources, really matters in that bigger picture of fighting AMR and pushing for healthcare that truly puts the patient first.
It does. Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe something for you to mull over.
In a world where getting good information about health threats like superbugs is crucial, but where stories like this might test our trust to the institutions we rely on.
How does the power of personal knowledge, maybe boosted by technology like Dr. Maya GPT, change things? How does it reshape our own responsibility for our health and maybe even the health of everyone around us?